Welcome to the Succeeding with Math Anxiety workshop presented by the Blue Ridge Community College Student Success Center. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with the tools you can use to succeed in your math classes despite any math anxiety you have. Let's get started. Although you probably already know exactly how anxiety feels, let's define it. Anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. Math anxiety is the same feeling, but specifically related to math performance. Math anxiety may occur at any time math is involved. This could be during a test, asking a question in class, while studying, or even when math arises in our personal lives. Generally speaking, anxiety gets a bad rep, and rightfully so. But before we totally degrade it, let's point out anxiety's beneficial purpose. Stress isn't all bad. It's actually our primary motivator. Healthy and manageable stress levels motivate us through our day. This healthy level of stress is indicated by the green region in the graph. However, if we deviate too far from this optimal level, we experience breakdowns. If our stress levels are too low, then we become apathetic and unmotivated. That's because stress is what motivates us in the first place. Notice the red region of the graph? That's the region we're discussing in this presentation. When our stress and anxiety levels exceed our ability to cope, we experience negative effects. Our once well-intended stress is now detracting us from its original purpose, to motivate us. Let's look at what actually happens when we reach this red zone. High stress levels can wreak havoc on our physical and emotional health. The immediate symptoms of anxiety include tense muscles, trouble breathing, headache, and much more. Cognitive or emotional symptoms include insomnia, fatigue, and trouble concentrating. Notice that trouble concentrating is written in red. That's an example of how too much stress can be counterproductive. When we're experiencing math anxiety, our anxiety's original purpose was to motivate us to do our best. However, once it gets so high, it in fact prevents us from accomplishing this task. The fact that high stress levels affects our ability to concentrate has been well studied, so let's look at this. Working memory is a system for temporarily storing and managing information required to carry out complex cognitive tasks such as learning, reasoning, and comprehension. Math relies heavily on our working memory. Let's look at these examples. These three calculations are relatively simple. 2 plus 5 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 4 divided by 2 is 2. However, notice that this one is not so simple. 2 plus 5 times 4 divided by 2. Answering this requires working memory, since information must be simultaneously stored, accessed, and manipulated. That's terrible. The part of your brain needed for this is the same exact part that high stress levels impacts. This is one reason why anxiety about math is so much more prevalent than anxiety in other academic subjects. So let's see what causes our brain to do this. Math anxiety normally starts at a very young age, typically in elementary or middle school. Previous poor performances, classroom embarrassment, and social influences are among the likely causes. Social influences can be diverse and could be brought about by friends, parents, or teachers who also experience math anxiety. So let's look at some specific strategies for success with math anxiety. The first strategy to succeeding in math is not really a strategy, it's a belief. You must believe that you have the potential to succeed in math. If you do not believe you can succeed, then you are setting yourself up for failure from the get-go. It's possible to categorize people's mindsets towards learning in two broad categories. The first of these categories is called a fixed mindset. An individual with a fixed mindset believes that intelligence, abilities, and talents are fixed at birth. Similarly, a person may think that math aptitude is predetermined. Although people often claim that they do or do not have a mathematical mind, there is no such thing. This type of rigid thinking can have negative consequences by leading you to believe that your success is predetermined. A growth mindset is just the opposite. A growth mindset is when we recognize that intelligence, abilities, and talents can be improved through effort. We realize that math aptitude is a consequence of learning methods rather than fixed abilities. By adopting a growth mindset, we realize that success is within our reach and consequently make the effort required. Once we realize that we have the potential for success, we can begin working on other methods to improve our success. Since our thoughts and behavior are interrelated, it's possible to influence one through the other. Specifically, by changing our thoughts, we can change our behavior. Cognitive fusion is the action of allowing our thoughts to dominate our behavior. Generally speaking, this is what we want to avoid. In a state of cognitive fusion, our thoughts seem like the absolute truth. They may feel like a threat and something that we must give our attention to. For example, in a state of cognitive fusion, if we believe that we feel nervous about a math test, then we won't do very well. Cognitive diffusion is the action of identifying the distinction between our thoughts and behavior. In a state of cognitive diffusion, we recognize that our thoughts are not always necessarily true, are not threatening, and does not imply that they even exist. If we're feeling nervous about a test in a state of cognitive diffusion, then we may recognize that the anxiety is a feeling, but not necessarily an indicator of our performance. Cognitive distortions are inaccurate thought patterns that cause us to take undesirable action. Much like this picture, cognitive distortions are the result of our mind's attempt to create patterns when there isn't really any pattern to be created. Here are a few cognitive distortions that may go along with math anxiety. Emotional reasoning is our mind's attempt to create factual conclusions from our emotions. Something you may say when emotional reasoning is, I feel nervous about this math test, so I must not be prepared enough. Overgeneralization is viewing a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. An example is believing that because you did poorly on one test, you will do poorly on all the rest. Labeling is the process of identifying with our perceived shortcomings. An example is the faulty belief that you can only excel at either writing or math, but not both. Just because you enjoy non-math intensive subjects doesn't mean you can't also enjoy math. Lastly, a mental filter is viewing something as either all positive or all negative. Most people are neither great nor terrible at math, but rather fall somewhere in between. Even math instructors who seem like they know it all are only that way because they've spent years studying the subject. So what can we do about these tricks that our mind plays on us? The first is to identify the distortion. The first step to this is to recognize when your mind is thinking irrationally. Writing these down, along with how you feel, is a great way to identify our thoughts and feelings. This has been documented to improve math anxiety when done immediately before a test. The survey method involves asking others if they're feeling or thinking the same way as you. Most likely, other students feel just as nervous as you. The semantic method involves replacing emotionally loaded language with more accurate language. One way to do this is to talk to yourself as if you were talking to another person. You wouldn't tell your classmate that they suck at math, so it's definitely not helpful to tell yourself that either. Saying something along the lines of, I struggle with the various positive and negative rules, is much more appropriate and helpful. Cost-benefit analysis is listing the advantages and disadvantages of a feeling. Earlier in the presentation, we discussed how stress actually functions as a motivator. So one benefit of math anxiety is that it motivates us to do our best. The methods and approach we take to practice math can have a tremendous impact on our success. Practice daily and practice in short intervals. It's better to practice daily in short segments than it is once or twice a week in long segments. Learn concepts and vocabulary over methods. Learning concepts and vocabulary will enable you to understand how and why various methods work the way they do. Learning concepts requires a deeper level of understanding, so you will be less likely to forget come test time. Also, visit the Student Success Center. Receiving tutoring and studying in an appropriate environment will set you up for success. Lastly, let's look at tips for choosing math classes. Identify instructors that you like and/or dislike. If you've developed a good relationship with a previous math instructor, then by all means try to take future classes with that same instructor. Similarly, avoid instructors you don't jive with. Study and take math courses when you are at your peak mental performance. Generally, it is best to avoid working on math very early or very late in the day. Take all math courses consecutively so you don't forget concepts between semesters. And lastly, reconsider online math courses. Online math courses generally place a greater emphasis on self-teaching, which you may or may not be comfortable with. Thanks for joining us. You're always welcome to visit the Student Success Center.